6, which is where we'll be tonight. Psalm 6. And David wrote this psalm, but we're not sure when. There's not enough historical clues in the actual text for us to kind of make a good judgment there. It's possible that it was composed during the time of Absalom's rebellion when David was a little older, and it's possible. And it seems to show that during the psalm that David is either he's dealing with some sort of a physical issue, he's sick, he's wounded, or something to that effect. We'll see that as we actually read it. And in the psalm, he is being seemingly attacked by his enemies, and he's struggling with that, and he basically describes his situation, really his plight, if you will, and he cries out to God himself for mercy. That's a great theme we see through the Psalms. I think that's a great theme that we should see through all the Scriptures, that we call out to God for mercy, because we need it. And so in verse 5, we'll see it looks as if he is facing death, and because the way it's written, I mean, this is not David. I don't believe this is David over exaggerating in a poetic way for metaphor. Like, he is literally in a horrible situation. Okay, so it's a real situation. If you look at your title, it probably says something about Sheminith, according to the Sheminith, and it also says, mine does, that this is for stringed instruments. So this is one of the psalms that we would have sung, and so some sort of a stringed instrument would have been used even then. And we don't really know what Sheminith refers to, but it means eighth. So it's possible that it's the title of a melody, or that's the rhythm of what was played. Some people think it meant that this was a hymn that would have been sung, and that the men would have sung at like an octave lower than the women, because of the way the term is. I don't know. I have no idea, but Psalm 12 uses the same term. All right, so Psalm 6 and Psalm 12 use it. Now, Psalm 6 is one of the penitential psalms, okay? That's the term, penitential. And what a penitential psalm is, it is a psalm written where the author knows that God is judging them for their sin, okay? Penitential, okay? Where we get, when you're penitent, you are repentant. That's the root, right? And other psalms would be Psalm 32, 38, 51, 102, 130, 143. And all of those psalms are helpful to us when we need to confess sin and draw closer to the Lord. That's the point of the psalm. And so in this psalm, David's going to give us 4 different periods of his struggle. Okay, and he's struggling. He's got a real situation going on around him, but he's also got an internal situation within him, and both are kind of coming together. Okay, both of them are kind of out ahead, and he is physically sick. He's running for his life. He thinks God's judging him. He's in danger. All of those come together. Okay, and sometimes that's the way life is, right? Sometimes that's just the way life is. When we're dealing with certain things, it just you ever had a whole lot of stuff just compound at the same moment? Sometimes that's a spiritual warfare type thing. That when we're dealing with secret sin, this and that, sometimes just things just pile on, and sometimes that's God's grace trying to catch our attention here. Okay, but he's going to give us 4 periods in his experience of moving through faith from this trial to some sort of spiritual triumph. Okay, he does it through faith, but he starts off in a trial. Okay, and so let's look at verses 1 through 3. It says, "O Lord, rebuke me not in your anger, nor discipline me in your wrath. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am languishing. Heal me, O Lord, for my bones are troubled. My soul also is greatly troubled. But you, O Lord, how long?" He doesn't even finish that thought. But you, O Lord, how long? He just leaves it like that. The first kind of period we see here is this agony that he is dealing with because of the discipline that's coming. Okay? "O Lord, rebuke me not in your anger, nor discipline me in your wrath." He talks about rebuking, anger, discipline, and wrath. Then he says, be gracious to me, O God, because I'm languishing. Then he says, heal me because my bones are troubled. And then he says, my soul is also greatly troubled. His bones are troubled, but his soul is greatly troubled, right? So he is dealing with this discipline that he feels is coming in his life because of what he's done. 8 times in this psalm, in the Hebrew, David addresses God as Lord Jehovah. That's important. That's the covenant name of God. Okay? That's an important theme that's one thing we lose in English. We don't see those names, and those names are important, the way the psalmist talks to God, right? He is reminding himself that God is a covenantal God. And that's important for us to remember, because that means God has a covenant with us, and that means that God has given his word. Okay? I'm thankful that God keeps his word, because we don't, right? We're not trustworthy people. God is. And so when he says he's praying and he understands that there's this punishment that he's dealing with, but he's also sure of the covenant that God made with him, which means, David knows that God is not going to throw him away. He's still got a plan with him and a purpose for him. That's important for us to remember when God deals with us, because God often deals with us, and when he does, he often rebukes us and chastens us. I mean, we do the same thing with our children, right? We discipline our children. Why? Because we love them, right? That's why we do that. We first warn our disobedient children, and then when they continue with that, what do? We discipline them, right? And often it's a progressive type thing, right? Well, I mean, that's some of the same things we see in Scripture. If you were to look at Hebrews 12, I'm just going to read 7 through 13, the writer of Hebrews reminds us, he says, it is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he, meaning God, disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained for it. Therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather healed. Hebrews reminds us that discipline is out of God's love for us. And it makes us holy, and it makes us better. Right? That's when he talks about strengthening, right? That's a good thing. It may seem painful, and it does, but it's going to make us better on the other side of it, right? So according to this passage in Hebrews, chastening or discipline is not punishment just given out by an angry judge, but discipline given out by a loving father. Completely different, right? That's a completely different level of punishment. And so sometimes God disciplines us in order to deal with our disobedience, but sometimes he disciplines us to strengthen us for what's coming. We don't ever like to think of it like that, right? That's one reason you train your children, because one day you're not going to be there, and you want them to have been trained to make the right decision when whatever happens, right? That's the awful thing about being a parent. I know you're all looking at me like you don't even know. I know I don't know, right? That's why we're trying to train them now, because I'm not going to be there. I'm not there at school. I'm not there when if they're on a bus or playing sports or whatever, right? So we want them to be able to make good decisions. So we discipline on the front side, knowing that hopefully it's some preventative for later on. That's the same thing God does with us. So when you consider, and we'll see here in a second, that David is surrounded by his enemies. He's surrounded by, they uses the term in verse 7, foes. In verse 8, he says workers of evil. He's surrounded by them. In verse 10, his enemies are there. Like when you consider